Welcome back, everyone. This is Mr. Brain, your friendly neighborhood gaming dad, here with another video. And while a lot of you have already seen some tier list videos from other people, especially with this event going on, I'd like to go ahead and share a bit of my own thoughts on the tier lists. Now, before I get started, you see from the basic template, I went ahead and added an SS tier as well as an F tier. I didn't want to include any of the gatherers or green heroes in my basic analysis of this, so I wanted to throw them into a place that wasn't going to affect the size of any of the other lists. And I also wanted an SS tier for who I believe are the top 3 commanders to be using in this game. And I will be adjusting things around as I go, because I'm just going to do this as I go. So if I change things, bear with me. I'm just trying to keep things as equal as possible. I'm just going to go through each of these heroes one by one and place them where I believe they belong as far as their usefulness, their versatility, their power, and how well you can use them in the game as a whole. So, not going to break down any niche heroes or place certain heroes higher simply because they're really good at one thing. Without further ado, let's start off with Akemi. Akemi is an epic hero, and definition of epic. She's a really great ranged commander with a decent sized AoE as a starter character for a ranged player or just someone who wants a ranged march. She is very effective at this. She is still a purple hero, though. So she's not going to be as good as a lot of the even more basic legendary commanders. However, she is a great start. For that, I'm going to put her at B. Sven is a legendary rider commander. He is specifically geared towards siege, and in that respect, he does very well. A lot of good damage, a lot of rider buffs, good on sieges. By himself, though, there's really not a lot there compared to some other commanders. So if I'm just trying to rate him by himself and not as a pair to another commander, I would put him as an A tier and not an S tier. There are other commanders that are just better than him by themselves, in my opinion. Next up, we have Freya, a rider commander on par with Akemi, but with slightly less damage buffs than Akemi has. She's very good at hit and run tactics for riders, and if you need a bit of AoE damage from a rider commander, she's your go-to. But again, she is an epic hero and not a legendary, so she lacks in a lot of damage potential. Still very useful, so not going to put her low on this list. I'm actually going to put her on par with Akemi because she's essentially a rider version of Akemi. Peter is a bit of an anomaly for me. I'm not a fan of straight siege heroes, and while Sven is a siege hero, he's really great at running riders. Peter doesn't have that buff. He's a siege commander that does give a decent attack buff when running multiple troop types, but once you get up to the level where you could use Peter in siege marches, you shouldn't be. Especially shouldn't be running multiple troop types. So his usefulness tends to fall off the better at the game you are, and the stronger you are as far as being a whale, the more you're going to pull away from Peter. It's because he has this particular problem, I'm going to rank him on the same level as Sven. I don't want to say he's down here in B, because he does have a pretty decent damage buff if you manage to get him out of boxes. However, I can't put him any higher than that because he's just not as good as more dedicated siege commanders or even specific troop type commanders. Russell is a zombie killing god. Outside of that, you're not going to use him that much. I've done a hero breakdown video of Russell before, and I described him as a weaker version of Tom as far as his active skill, because it does do damage and it does heal. After that active skill, though, there's nothing else that sets him apart from being able to do anything else but kill zombies. I would like to say his active skill puts him higher on the list because of the healing and damage that it does, but I just can't put him any higher than a C. He's really good at zombies. That's it. Zia, I've been back and forth about. She does damage, she heals, and it's a 2-target attack and 2-target heal. So she's affecting 4 units on the field all at once, but not very well. Outside of that, she's primarily a gathering hero. So while she does gather, I could put her in F, but that first active skill and the little bit of buffs that she can get from her other skills, I think I'm going to go ahead and put her in D. You should switch out of using her in combat pretty quickly, but in a pinch, she does have her uses. Now, Sio is your standard match for Akemi early on in the game because she is a ranged commander that boosts squad attack, which is very handy for boosting Akemi's AoE damage. But she suffers from a similar problem to Sven. She's geared towards siege for some reason. And because she's a purple commander, an epic commander that's geared towards siege, you won't be using her for that purpose. And she's really only good when paired with Akemi, in my opinion. The squad attack buff is nice. The ranged buffs are nice. But you need someone else to capitalize on those buffs. For that, I can't put her any higher than C. Edward, I feel like they made an attempt to create someone who could negate all of the different debuffs that come out of this game, but they didn't do so in a very effective manner. Being able to remove debuffs when you're healing your own troops is nice because healing is affected by your HP stat, and if you're removing the debuffs before you heal, you can increase your healing. However, because he doesn't have great rage generation, he's not going to be doing that on a very consistent basis, and that leaves a long window for troops to be able to debuff him again immediately after they've been removed. Now, if you had a rage generation passive on him, or the healing was a bit more substantial, I would place him a bit higher. And he does have okay infantry buffs. One passive, I believe, does boost his defense by quite a bit. I'm going off of memory here. But it's only for a short time, and it's not substantial enough to carry him any higher. For that, I'm going to put him at C. John. I feel so bad for what they were trying to do with John, and it just failed. They wanted to create a version of Carrie, the Joker commander, that was easily accessible to everyone to counter the amount of healing that was possible even in the early game. Because you had Liam, you had Edward, Tom was out there, you had healing in the game. So they wanted to try and find a way to counteract that. John is not it. They made a siege commander that was epic, and all that he can do is siege. And he does not do it very well. By the time you get him to a level that you could use him at siege, you should be using someone else for siege. And the reduction in healing isn't strong enough to overpower or even come close to knocking out characters like Tom or even Liam in that respect. I can't, in good conscience, put him any higher than D. He's not a gatherer, but you should be avoiding putting any investment into him. Now, Park is interesting. You get free relics for him for participating in Antpeed. He's not a bad commander. He's a good pair for Freya for reducing single target attack and defense by a pretty significant amount, 25%, I believe, and does have decent rider buffs. So if you're running a support team and you want to reduce your enemy's stats by as much as possible, he is an effective way to do that for a purple commander. However, outside of that, he runs in the same problem as CO does. He's not very well built for PvP combat or open field combat for that matter. You can run him for killing zombies very well. And he's not a gatherer, so he doesn't have any of his passives wasted like that. But he's also just not very powerful. So if you want to use him for the debuff in order to pump another commander's damage, that's great. But again, you need to have another good commander in order to make use of that debuff. So for that, I'll put him C. I'll just go ahead and skip Angela. While she is one of the better gatherers early on because of how quickly you can max her out, squad capacity buff's really nice. She's still a gatherer. Don't use her or anything else. Now we're getting into one of the heavy hitters. Bella is still one of the, if not the best siege commanders or siege leads in the game. She's not even dedicated for siege. If you just got done with Island like I did, one of the stronger siege marches that you'll see is Bella Sven. And for very good reason. When running solid riders, they are very powerful. Even going up against infantry towers, they dish out a very significant amount of damage. And when running riders, it's easier to get them reinforced because they're running the faster troops. I'm going to put her in S rank easily for now, while I decide who my top 3 will be. But know that Bella is very easily one of the contenders for being up here in the SS tier. This is Green Hero. Just go ahead and save that now. Now, Nakano falls into the same issue as some of the other commanders I've discussed already. She isn't that great on her own. And if I'm trying to give my opinion on each of these heroes individually, I want to make sure that they're going to do well on their own. And Nakano is great for troop buffs for ranged squads, but ranged squads do best when dealing skill damage, because you want to be able to boost that huge amount of damage as much as possible. Now, if they had another commander out here that was primarily for buffing troop basic damage, I might put her higher, but because she requires another commander in order to be truly useful, I have to stick her down here in A tier. Liam, the first commander you get in the game that's remotely useful. And I've done a hero breakdown of him. Very good for a starting hero. Good, not bad damage, great healing, good squad attack. He's got survivability and damage. But he's middle of the line across the board. He's not out damaging some of the better heroes, and he's not tanking a lot. However, I personally think that I would put him higher than the rest of these C tier commanders because of how useful he is for such a good portion of the early game, and how easy it is to get relics for him. I'm going to go ahead and solidly put him in B tier. Just know that I would not place him equal to Akemi and Freya in this case. starting to wonder if I should have had B- and B+ tiers for separating some of these epic commanders. Alex. Alexander is a great epic commander, and I know he's a gatherer, but having someone that can buff as many troops as he does is phenomenal. Even if all he does is give a little bit of healing and the huge buff that he does, for that alone, he's easily B tier. I may decide later to put him in A tier, and he'd be one of the only epic commanders to make that list. He's just that good. The buffs for that make him so viable in field combat that it cannot be ignored. My boy Raigoro. First commander I awakened. I'm biased as hell. I love mitigating damage far more than I appreciate healing it or dealing it. Because I feel like my job is to stay on the field as long as possible, and just healing damage that's already happened or dealing damage doesn't fulfill that role quite as well as just taking that damage number right off the top. Raigoro's got great stats, great stat buffs, a good deal of damage mitigation. I really wish they would take that 3-second timer off of it just so I could get the most out of it, because 9,600 damage isn't enough to take a full skill damage hit from the heavy hitters. But if they at least took that 3-second off, he would absorb the full 9,600 and put him on par with some of the bigger ones. But as biased as I am, there are better infantry commanders. I won't lie. If I put Raigoro and Thunder on a tower or on a operations base in Pompeii, it's gonna take them forever to take it, which is entirely the point. However, I can't in good conscience put him in the top rank of commanders for that reason. He has to be swarmed in order to deal a lot of damage. He does his job very well. He's just not as great as some of the bigger hitters. One of those bigger hitters is Tom. If Tom was stuck at his pre-update days back before they buffed his area of effect buffs, then he would be pretty average in my opinion. He was already great, but he wasn't this great. He had the damage, he had the healing, he did not have the AoE buffs to his teammates that he does now. With those buffs, with the healing and the healing buff, with the infantry stats, there's really no excuse not to put him in S tier. He's still one of the better 1v1 commanders out there. Hank. I've already talked plenty of shit about Hank. I really don't want to have to talk too much more shit about him. As a siege commander, he does his job very well. He's not the best because he's not a troop-specific commander. That's really the only thing hampering him from being a stronger siege commander. But outside of siege, he is next to useless. Not quite useless, next to useless. I really want to put him right here. He's not up there with the rest of the legendary commanders. He's not even as good as Peter in my book, because Peter isn't as specific as Hank on his buffs. I'm going to put Hank at B. I can't put him anywhere else in my mind other than A, B, or somewhere in between. Lee is still S tier. Because, and my only argument for that is, if you see a Lee on the field and you're not killing him immediately, you're doing it wrong. His area of effect debuff is so detrimental to your own team if you leave it alone that you have to kill him. And because of that mentality that still exists today from this last island, you can't put him anywhere else but S rank. He's still one of the highest damage dealing commanders in the game. He has an amazing debuff that lasts for a couple of seconds. If you pair him with a rage generation person, then you've got a great debuff. If you pair him with someone that deals damage, you have one of the greater damage dealers in the game. It's just, Lee is still that good. You can't put him anywhere else. Lewis, one of his possible pairs, is also S tier. Lewis is still going to be one of those contenders for the SS tier because of the sheer amount of damage that he does and the fact that his primary skill scales back to comparable single target damage whenever the field starts to thin out. So he doesn't run into that problem of his usefulness dying out whenever the enemy starts dying out, like Lee or Charlie or other AoE commanders. He gets to regain some of his strength towards single targets as the targets start to drop. Coupled with his immense skill damage, great ranged buffs, and he's still one of the better garrison commanders in the game. You can't go wrong buffing Lewis. S tier. Easy. Easy F tier here. Jhin. I have not played with Jhin. I don't have the VIP level. I don't have the money. So, to any of the whales that have been running him, please forgive me if I get this wrong. What I'm speaking of from on paper here is he reminds me of Julius from Rise of Kingdoms done worse. Julius wasn't that great in Rise of Kingdoms, but I liked how he worked with other commanders. Jhin, he's not troop specific. He does have great troop buffs for a long period of time. You can easily get 75% uptime on those troop buffs. I believe it's up to 40% for 5 seconds, and a decent amount of rage generation. However, because he's a siege commander, you want skill damage in order to break down these walls quite a bit faster. And because Jhin isn't troop specific, he doesn't have the skill damage. He's far better than Peter or Hank, but I don't think he's in the top tier. Jaden, I love Jaden. I'm going to go ahead and put Jaden A tier because you get him for free, because you can keep getting his relics for free until he's awakened. You don't have to waste any of your universal relics, and you actually can't. He's got a fairly useful debuff and okay damage. But yeah, he's definitely not an S tier commander. I don't want to put him down with Akemi, Freya. Yeah, this is definitely an argument for Alex being higher. But I'm on the fence about him. I would put him in a B plus rank, but I definitely wouldn't put him in a B rank. Maxine. And Maxine still makes me laugh because I see so many people marching with her on the field, not going to gathering locations. And I know that when you're running a farm or when you're running a newer account, having this be the legendary you boosted into makes her easy to use on the field because she's high enough level to gather for you. Why isn't she high enough level to fight? If her rage siphon, if her rage was a siphon, or if it affected more rage, I would be more inclined to use her, but she deals less damage than Jaden does, and doesn't have any good buffs to support her when she's out on the field. So I could put her in B or C tier, because I'm going to go ahead and put her C tier. She's a gatherer that made it out of F rank. Be happy with that. But do it. I understand what they were going for with her. They had an infantry-based siege commander in mind that they didn't want to lock down to siege because the idea of infantry on siege seems ridiculous. But they built someone whose attack can be buffed to absolute insane amounts, locked it down to infantry, and made her useful in prolonged fights. That all of that together screams an infantry siege commander. I believe you can get her buffs on her own to over 80% in infantry attack. That does shift towards defense quite a bit when she gets weaker, but that she's not as great as other siege commanders. On the field, wonderful in single combat, but you're not going to deal with a lot of single combat. I loved the idea, but it seems like they got scared when making her, that they backed off of what she could be used as and tried to round out her buffs towards the open field instead of making a dedicated siege commander. So, not S tier, very powerful, very good infantry commander, but because they didn't push her that little bit more towards siege, give her a little bit better buffs, but lock it to siege, I can't put her any higher. Peggy, and this is the before Peggy. If it was the later Peggy, I'd put her in D, only not because she's good in combat, because that awakened skill is broken, which part of me hates you newer regions for having access to a 10% building buff, but I get it. Catherine. Catherine's good. For a VIP commander that is as strong as she is, definitely worth the investment. Because until Bella comes around, as far as rider commanders are concerned, there's no topping her. Even without Cynthia, Catherine is an amazing skill damage commander. She's got her own rage generation. She's a single target version of Lewis that hits like a truck. So I really like her. I want to put her in like an A+ tier. I think she can sit in S tier, but she's not going to be a contender for the top 3. Cynthia. You're a fast rider. I don't know if I can, because you have very low damage, because your buffs aren't as good as your sister. You do have a little bit of healing, but without Catherine, you're not that useful. Not in my opinion. I'm going to put you at B tier. Jeremy, my speedy boy, still an F. I just, if you've seen my other videos working around trying to get Jeremy to be the fastest car rider, I will use him in Pompeii. I will continue to use him in Pompeii because I'm not built for riders. He's still my boy. Martin, B tier. Martin is so powerful when paired with another healing commander. If you're running him by himself, he's not great. He's just not. Healing is based on damage, and he doesn't buff his own damage. He does buff his own healing, sure. He does have great defensive buffs for when he's healed. He pairs so well with another healing commander, it's ridiculous. But I'm trying to make these by themselves comparisons. And Martin is not good by himself. Charlie's up next, and just to go ahead and get this out of the way. Charlie is easily A rank in my book. The sheer amount of damage that he does, the rage generation from his primary skill, there's just no topping that combination. If it was one or the other, he would definitely rank lower, but because it's such a strong AoE damage and the sheer amount of rage it generates, knocking 2.5 seconds off of your skill cycle right off the top. I cannot, in good conscience, put him any lower than this. I just can't. Next up is Chun. I personally haven't used Chun, but I have seen her used a lot in this island, and I cannot deny the amount of damage she can do. While rallies with her appear weaker than they are because of her weaker basic attack damage, her skill damage is absolutely insane. Because of her being able to counter some of the best garrisons in the game, I don't feel odd putting her at S tier at the very least. And I'll go over why I think she should just stay there later. Thunder. Thunder created the next two range commanders, and I will not accept any arguments to the contrary. Thunder created the current garrison meta centered around him and ways to counter him. And if it wasn't for him, I don't believe Chun and Carry would have been built the way that they are. Because of his amount of healing, the counter damage that he can do, and the nice little bit of buff and debuff that he can do in a small area around him, I can't put him any lower than S tier. He is also going to be a contender for double S rank later. Carry. Our Resident Joker was created with one purpose and one purpose only: to be able to counter Thunder. And after this island, I can say that if everything else is equal, Carry does his job. He weakens Thunder's healing to such an extent that he can't heal off the sheer amount of skill damage that is dealt to him. If you don't pair Carry with a commander that does the skill damage for him, because he does quite a bit, and he boosts quite a bit, it's not going to do as well. But Carry is going to be an A rank for me. I don't think he's as great as Chun, but he's definitely not a B rank commander because of how well he counters some of the best garrisons in the game. Here's an easy one. Here's another easy one. Easy one. Easy one. Samuel, I'm sorry. They tried to make another commander in blue that you could use. And if anyone from ROK remembers, you're not Tomo. I loved using Tomo as a blue commander for a long time, but you're not. And green commander. Now we're down to who I believe are the top three, and if there's any changes that I would make to this list. First off, Lewis has to go up here. Thunder, I believe, has to go up here. Lewis's damage and versatility, I believe, make him one of the top commanders in the game still. Thunder still holds the Garrison meta, and because of how important Garrison is by the time you get him, he remains useful for the rest of the game, so far anyway. Question remains, do I put Lee or do I put Bella? Or maybe even Chun. Chun has great damage. However, in order to see her usefulness, I've really only seen her paired with Carry. I would like to see more marches with a Chun Lewis to see how that damage plays out, because she has great skill damage buffs. He has great skill damage buffs. I don't think I've seen enough of her to warrant putting her in SS. So I believe it comes down to Bella's great damage with riders or Lee's insane debuffs. And I'm really going to put this down to who you'd want to kill first. Bella is up there for who you'd want to kill first. She doesn't have a lot of defensive traits, and riders, because of them being weak to infantry, are great targets for infantry troops. However, Lee still holds the position of most hated commander to see on the field. If you see a Lee on primary or on secondary on the field, it's pretty common knowledge you should be killing him first. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and put Lee up in the SS rank. Now, are there any commanders from any of this list you would shift up or down for any reason? If you believe so, please let me know in the comments below. This is my list. This is my opinion. I understand everybody else is going to have a different view of things. Wales especially, for how I place some of their siege commanders. But just know, this is coming from me, a fairly low spender in the game, on how I would place some of these commanders as far as their usefulness and applicability in combat. So please, let me know what you think of my list. I'm happy to make these videos for you. If you want any particular hero broken down as to why I put them where they are, please let me know. I'll either direct you to the hero breakdown video I've already made or break down that hero for you anew. With that, this is Mr. Brain, your friendly neighborhood gaming dad, signing off.